open the hearing on Senate Bill 310. Senator Wanzenreed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Dave Wanzenreed. I have the privilege of representing Senate District 49 in Missoula. Members of the committee, the bill in front of you today, Senate Bill 310, is a bill to add a condition to those maladies that might be treated with medical marijuana. The substance of the bill is on page 2 at line 3. It's fairly straightforward. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to make a handout, if I may, please.
Yes, give them to the secretary over there.
Mr. Chairman, for those of you on the committee that were here before, you'll recognize the bill I'm handing out was the bill from last session, which proposed exactly the same thing. And if you look at the current law, which is being amended by House Bill 310, you'll see all the maladies that can be prescribed, for which prescriptions for medical marijuana may be issued. One of the arguments that's been advanced in the past is there's no medical evidence at all that medical marijuana actually does any good for anything. So the question from a policy standpoint needs to be asked is, why do we have any conditions in statute then? If there's a reason for it, it's because the voters voted it in. If you take a look at the differences between the old law and the laws that exist now, between the handout and the current one, you'll see that there's been some rearranging and some rewording that was done by the last session. This bill proposes, again, to ask post-traumatic stress disorder, and in the interest of full disclosure, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I have a legal review notice regarding the conformity with state and federal constitutions. I don't know if you've had any of these yet, but I want to make sure, as part of the record, that you receive this notice. And I'll submit this so it can be handed around so you can look at it, and then you can add it to your record as well. Mr. Chairman, when you read the second handout, there's just one that's to be circulated. You'll note, if you haven't had one of these yourself, that the medical marijuana law we have on the books in Montana has constitutional problems. The very kind of issues that are brought here all the time. The medical marijuana law does not comply with the Controlled Substances Act, the federal law. So any amendments to that, as this bill proposes to do, Senate Bill 310, do not also comply. So I want to make sure that that's expressly clear for the record, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be happy to deal in that a little bit more. It's often said that conditions that should be on this list ought to have evidence and scientific evidence that they actually are effective. When you listen to the traditional medical community, they'll tell you there's no value in this at all. And yet, with veterans returning from combat zones, especially combat zones in Afghanistan and Iran, they'll tell you that they've witnessed horrors that none of us can possibly imagine. And they have post-traumatic stress disorder. So they're left with a choice. The choice being that they can take harsh prescription medication that all of you know about, that you read about on the Sunday newspapers that have these little ads about all sorts of medications available, and the side effects are 2 pages long. So when they take that choice, the consequence of making that decision is sometimes to have side effects are actually worse than post-traumatic stress disorder. The other option is to go cold turkey and to live a fraction of the life that they might otherwise enjoy, not just for themselves, but for their families, their wives, their children, their grandchildren, cousins, neighbors. And last, they can go on the black market now because we haven't authorized this. We pat these veterans that we praise with these resolutions we pass. We praise them on the one hand, then pat them and say, take 2 of these and call me in the morning for these prescription medications. let's talk a little bit about traditional medicine. I'm a cancer survivor. I didn't use medical marijuana, but I did not use any traditional medication at all, nor the procedures. And I was given 8 months to live in 1995. I don't know how the non-traditional medications worked, but I can tell you that they did work. And it's a shame that we have so many people that we praise who make the option on the fourth choice to put a gun in their mouth and end their life because they cannot seek the relief and they choose not to be a felon at the same time. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we can do better than that. Now, many of you that were here last time said, boy, I wish we could have a hearing without having a circus. Okay, why can't we talk about medical marijuana without packing the room? Well, you've got it. And one of the reasons you have it is because the people out there are afraid to come out in public and talk about this. Just about exactly 2 years ago today, there were raids on all the growers in Montana. And everybody said, boy, we'll put a stop to that industry once and for all. Well, you know what happened? That market went underground, and the people that were using medical marijuana, including those who no longer qualify for a card, went underground as well. And those that were using it for post-traumatic stress disorder did the same thing. So we now have an opportunity to discuss this issue in cold, hard terms with no emotion, no big crowds, no disorderly people here, no threats to anybody. And I would ask you to think about what we're asking for here. To add a condition that we all know exists. It used to be called battle fatigue, and it was called a number of other things. But we do know now, even in our domestic lives, people that suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, and again, I can't tell you how it works, but those people that can't come to this mic and legally testify that they use it will tell you when you talk to them privately. And these people are not just in Missoula, in case any of you are wondering about that. They're everywhere in Montana. They're in places like Harleton, in Malta, in Hardin, in Florence, in Libby. They're out there. And frankly, they're not proud of the fact that they're a felon. I know several of you on the committee have had loved ones that could not legally receive medical marijuana, and trips were made to Missoula in the dead of night or other places to get marijuana so they could enjoy the benefit of the relief that they could experience by using marijuana. Members of the committee, this is an important issue that needs to be discussed. It would be very popular just to ignore this, but the need that existed before continues to exist today. This bill provides an avenue to have a discussion about a need that exists and whether or not we're actually going to go a step further to at least acknowledge for the veterans that come home that we can do better for them. Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. How many folks are here to testify in favor of the bill? Is anyone here to testify in opposition to it? And is anybody here as an informational witness? Okay, let's take the first proponent, please.
Sorry, I'm so short. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Representative Ray Peppers, House District 41. I wrote a bunch of information out here, but my family is a very strong military family. My father served in World War II. My father-in-law served in the Korean War. Many uncles who've served and brothers served in Vietnam War. 2 sons that served in Iraq. Also a stepson. And I have a son that served in Afghanistan. He was 82nd Airborne Cavalry Scout, volunteered to serve on the front lines. He lost his leg, lower leg in the IED, because he volunteered to be the minesweeper. He said a lot of his comrades were right out of high school when I asked him why he chose to do that. He said, well, at least I've lived a life. I'm 27 years old, and I look at these young boys, And he said, I want them to have come out of here and at least be able to do something else with their lives. But when, a soldier comes home and his family greets him, they don't realize what's going on in his mind. We think he's okay. But, they see so much in action. The stories my son have told me, the horror, and we expect them to come back and be normal. They'll never be the same again. PTSD is a real issue that they have to deal with. When my son came home, he's still at Walter Reed. At least, me, when I came, they allowed me to be with him. But then he also pulled me down into the trenches with him of his mind, of what he had to go through. The nightmares, I swore he never slept. Also, to deal with the pain and the knowledge that he would never be the same again. And he's real positive. He's an awesome young man, but there was times when he would break down and cry and say, am I going to ever be accepted as the same person? Will I ever love somebody again? Will, I be able to maintain a job? So he had a lot of questions, and he fights a hard battle. But we as legislators, we make decisions for the people of Montana. We have a big job. And a lot of these warriors, they come back. They turn to alcohol. They turn to prescription drugs. And they can't get off them. It's legal for them to do this, and it frustrates me that, there are some that are saying, give us an alternative method. Allow us to choose this method of medical marijuana to ease our minds, to ease our physical pain, our mental, to do something, because we still want to be productive members of society. Allow us this choice. And I ask that this bill do pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent, please.
Thank you for letting me stand up here and speak. And please excuse me if my emotions get in the way.
You'll need
to
get the mic a little closer, please.
Okay. I am here today to support SB 310. My name is Tammy Renee Cecil, and I'm here to speak on behalf of my father. He is a Vietnam veteran. He was in Vietnam at the time of the Tet-a-Tet offensive. My father was in the Air Force, and he was part of the Tactical Air Support Party, 9th Division, 1st Brigade. During his time there, he was left in the jungles on many occasions to find his way back to his base on his own. When on leave in Hawaii, he could not wear his uniform because he was demeaned, berated, and belittled. He was called a baby killer, and he was literally spit on. A proud airman forced to not wear his uniform. The whole Vietnam experience made it hard for him to trust anyone and built resentment and anger about the way that he was treated during and after the war. My father continued his career as a medical electronics engineering technician. He has worked for NASA, Abbott Laboratories, and the VA hospital here in Montana. These are the health issues that he suffers from: anxiety and fear, which are the most common things that are reported with PTSD, an eating disorder, insomnia, irritability, anger, phlebitis, emphysema, bronchitis, and severe heart problems. Our Vietnam veterans lived through war zone conditions. I will repeat this. My father was left in the jungles to fend for himself. The fear and the anxiety were not left there. They continue to haunt him on a daily basis. My father suffers from PTSD. These are the effects that medical cannabis had on him. His anxiety lessened almost immediately. His fears had decreased. He was not in a state of panic on a continuous basis. Eating was no longer an issue. 129 pounds to 150 pounds, and he maintains this weight as of this day. It helped him sleep. He was not up all night watching the windows from dusk till dawn. It helped his depression. He became engaged, smiling. He was cooking, shopping, even in the yard with my mom. And his breathing improved, even when he was outside. It helped with the pain he suffers due to bouts of phlebitis and arthritis, and his issues with his heart stabilized. These are my dad's, I have my dad's glasses that he wore, and they were trifocals. During the use of cannabis, he no longer had to use his trifocals. He only used reading glasses. And his doctors were stunned, and they couldn't explain why he could see. In my father's professional career in medical electronics and many off-record conversations with doctors, they praised medical cannabis, but would not go on record saying so because of fear of losing their license. I am asking you, please, to support SB 311 and also SB 310, and to add PTSD to the qualifying conditions for the use of medical cannabis. I have seen the benefits with this medicine on my father. I love my father so very much. He deserves safe access to this medication, not more fear of being incarcerated for using something that helps him so very much. My father fought for this country. He was a proud soldier. My father is an intelligent man. He has worked all his life, paid his taxes, and he has children who love him and a grandson who thinks that the world revolves around him. He deserves quality of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Further proponents? Further proponents?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Dr. Pat Pardis, P-A-R-D-I-S. I practiced chiropractic in this state for approximately 25 years and retired about 10 years ago. I represent the MTCIA both as a board member and a lobbyist. I will hope that you will understand for a moment. I'd like to regress. In order to understand the prejudice against marijuana, I think we all need to know a very short, brief history. Marijuana has been used for thousands of years by societies, both in spiritual and medicinal ways. But something very strange happened in the 1930s. And to understand what happened, you need to know a man by the name of Harry Anslinger, who became the first director of the Bureau of Narcotics, and later to transform into the DEA. Henry Ford had made a statement that he was about to make all his cars from hemp. Randolph Hearst, who owned tens of millions of acres of timberland, felt threatened that hemp was going to take the paper industry away from him. Harry Anslinger married into the Hearst family. Harry Anslinger stood in front of the U.S. Congress and said that marijuana was the most devastating drug, that it made darkies want your white wife, that Black Americans and Mexican Americans were using marijuana as part of their culture for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. But through Harry Anslinger and Randolph Hearst, marijuana was made to be a race-based drug. It was dangerous. It would want that dark man to come after your wife. To understand the dangers of marijuana, we need to talk about the lethal dose 50. LD 50 is the amount of this chemical that will kill 50% of the people that are given to it. For instance, the LD 50 of cocaine is 2.25 grams. Guess what? Scientists have not been able to develop an LD 50 for marijuana because you'd have to eat about 4 pounds of it to kill you. Somebody would choke to death before that happened. So my first point is to let you know that the prejudice against marijuana has been race-based. It has been based on totally false information. And if any of you believe in science, I would suggest that you go ahead and read up on marijuana. Marijuana is not dangerous. The country of Israel is using marijuana in PTSD. The University of Arizona Medical School is about to start a study of marijuana's effect on PTSD. However, the federal government's deemed they're not going to give the marijuana to the school to conduct a study. So here we are faced with a catch-22. We don't have any studies to prove that this helps. But then again, the government's not going to let you do the study. I would like all of the members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, to understand that the prejudice that we are living under for marijuana started with some very racist, antitrust protection people. And this has carried on for generations now, and it's time to end this. It's time that we allow people an alternative other than the normal orthodox medical route. I ask for your support of Senate Bill 310, and I thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent, please.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Nikki Zupanik with the ACLU of Montana. And we're in strong support of Senate Bill 310, and thank Senator Wanson-Reid for bringing forward this bill again. We're in support for many of the reasons that have already been stated by proponents. And as you know, just adding PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, to the list of qualifying conditions doesn't change any of the other mechanics of how our Medical Marijuana Act works. So just as a reminder to the committee, this condition would still require a doctor's recommendation before a patient would be able to use. So just as a reminder that all of the other requirements and restrictions of the Act would apply to this new additional qualifying condition as well. But one thing that I did want to note that hasn't been raised by some of the other proponents yet, as Senator Wanson-Reid shared the legal review note and brought that to your attention, I just wanted to add a couple more points of information for you and to clarify a bit about the Reich decision that is noted in that legal review note. Just like to clarify that the Reich case was a challenge against the federal law, and the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the Federal Controlled Substances Act as being validly enacted under our Commerce Clause. That case was not a challenge to the California Compassionate Use Act. In fact, the United States Supreme Court has yet to weigh in at all or to find any state medical marijuana law that has been preempted by being in conflict with the federal law. So it is possible, in other words, for the two sets of statutory schemes to coexist. The U.S. Supreme Court has made it very clear that the Federal Controlled Substances Act is validly enacted, and under that act, marijuana remains an illegal substance, a controlled substance, and users in the state of Montana and all across the country remain subject to those penalties. but also the state laws that have been enacted in nearly 14 other states across this country that state that there will be no penalty if a person is using medical marijuana within the confines of the State Act. That is also valid. We can have both statutory schemes coexist. There has yet to be any ruling by the United States Supreme Court that state medical marijuana acts are preempted by the federal law. So I just wanted to clarify that for the committee, that there's nothing that this state can do, nothing that this body can do to nullify the Federal Controlled Substances Act. Nothing that this body can do to provide protection from federal enforcement of that federal law. But it is completely within the purview of this body to decide that state resources will not be directed towards medical marijuana patients who are complying within the confines of the state law, and that there will not be any state criminal penalties for those who comply with that act. So I just wanted to clarify that for the committee. I urge your support for this bill. It's a small change to the law, but it's a very important and big change to Montana veterans who are struggling with the effects of having served. And this bill will give them at least the opportunity to speak with their doctors and to seek out a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Nathan Pierce, P-I-E-R-C-E. I am here as the Executive Director of the Montana Coalition for Rights. I am also a veteran, and I'm here representing many veterans across the state of Montana who has written our organization and asked us to represent them as they cannot be here today. The issue of PTSD is something that is very prevalent in our returning vets that are coming home from conflicts across the globe, and their alternatives are typically psychotropic drugs that, in fact, the number one side effect of these drugs are increased risk of suicide. We'd like to encourage you to support and vote a do pass on 310, giving the veterans and their physicians an alternative to these drugs so that they can, use a safe alternative that may alleviate their symptoms of PTSD and give them the freedom to make the choice of their medical decisions and give their doctors the freedom to consult with them, figure out the best course of treatment for them to alleviate these symptoms. I greatly appreciate your time, and I appreciate Senator Wands and Reed introducing this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there further proponents to speak? Further speakers in favor?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is David Paul Dubé, D-U-B-E. I was born in upstate New York in 1948. My folks moved to Montana, Shelby, in fact, in 1950. I lived in Montana for 18 years until I received a draft notice and decided I wasn't going to be drafted. So I joined the United States Navy. I went into the Navy with an increase in rate because I had a Red Cross EMT card. So the Navy convinced me I ought to be a hospital corpsman. And after 14 weeks of medical training, I went to the Balboa Naval Hospital in San Diego for duty until I was told that they needed hospital corpsmen in Southeast Asia. So I went to Camp Pendleton for 8 weeks to become a Marine. I wore this. It's a symbol of physicians, okay? I served from August of 1969 until September of 1970. I put 3 people in body bags, okay? When I came home in 1970, I got married 3 days after I landed in the United States. I suffered none of the dishonor that others, members of the military, suffered. However, the transition from military life to civilian life, I was dumped. I suffered with PTSD for over 25 years until my wife finally convinced me to see a doctor. This is a very emotional experience for me, folks. I do this with trepidation because I seek my medical treatment with the VA at Fort Harrison. There isn't a single doctor out there, and I've spoken to 3 of them, that will give me a recommend. What they will do for me, and what my private doctor did for me, was give me pharmaceuticals. Well, I can explain the fact of taking pharmaceuticals is not the answer. We called marijuana wacky tobacco, okay? And indeed, there is a variety of marijuana that will make you high. Cannabis sativa, cannabis indica is what you folks will call medical marijuana. Now, I cannot say before you publicly I can't really be here, folks, but I am. I'm going to stand up for every veteran that won't stand up. You need to deal with it, folks. Make it possible for me. As many hoops as you've made necessary for me to get it. Make it possible so that I can choose what I want to put in my body to help me sleep at night. After 25 years of having the meat end of a pool cue next to me in bed, not being able to be woken by my wife without the fear of hurting her. Make it possible for us to get a decent night's sleep. Thank you. Please vote for the bill.
Thank you. Are there further proponents to speak? If not, we'll go to opponents.
Good morning, Chairman Murphy, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Candace Payne, P-A-Y-N-E. I'm here on behalf of Rimrock Foundation. Rimrock is a private nonprofit provider of treatment for substance abuse and co-occurring mental health disorders. Rimrock is Montana's oldest and largest drug and alcohol addiction treatment program, serving over 4,000 patients annually in 134 beds and with a large outpatient program in a continuum of service levels. No one is suggesting that PTSD is not a problem. It has been a problem for generations. As the previous witness spoke, He reminded me of my father. My dad was a World War II veteran, drafted out of Columbus, Montana. He served all through North Africa. He was at the landing at Salerno. He fought all the way up Italy. He was at the Battle of the Bulge. Till the day he died, when he was in his 80s, if you woke Dad up unexpectedly, he would wake up swinging. He continued to have issues with what I now know is post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a photograph of my dad in an Old Life magazine. He's sitting in front of a beautiful statue in Rome, and he's holding a man in his arms, and he told me that it was his buddy, and the man had died, and Dad had carried him out of the battlefield up to where he thought was a place of safety. He remembered that. I mean, he talked to us about it when he was dying. We recorded his final stories. He talked about driving a tank off a loading ship when they landed at Salerno. The tank was sealed with red lithium grease. Dad was the tank commander that ordered the tank had to go off. They landed in about 20 feet of water, and then they were driving up to the land up on Salerno on the beach. Their orders were, if the tank in front of you, if their engine died, push it off and keep going. All the men in the tank in front of you would die. They would drown. The same was for the men in his tank. And he had all kinds of stories. This stuff doesn't go away. So please don't take my testimony as saying post-traumatic stress disorder is not important. What I'm here to talk about is the marijuana part of this. Marijuana leads to further substance abuse problems. It has been the experience of the treatment providers at Rimrock that this is the case. Marijuana is a gateway drug. I have a position statement on marijuana from the National Association of Drug Court Professionals that I would like to have handed out with your permission, sir. Just a couple of things that I wanted to point out to you for your deliberations. On the second page, it talks about the effects of marijuana, and these are set out in whereas statements leading up to the conclusion. One of them is, whereas marijuana continues to...
I object to it being called marijuana. It is a slang word. It is cannabis.
I think the witness is able to choose her own words at this point.
And I'm just reading from a document. Whereas marijuana continues to negatively affect attention, memory, learning, and intelligence after intoxicating effects of the drug have subsided, whereas the use of marijuana triggers relapse to other drugs of abuse among participants in substance abuse treatment and increases failure rates in drug courts. It impairs the ability to function effectively and safely on the job and increases work-related substances, tardiness, accidents, compensation claims, job turnovers. Higher levels of marijuana use are associated with lower satisfaction with intimate romantic relationships, work, family, friends, leisure pursuits, and life in general. And these are all, there's footnoted with the studies that are substantiating those comments. And it's just something else to consider when you are thinking about this bill. On behalf of Rimrock Foundation, I'd ask you for a do not pass on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there further opponents wishing to speak? Further opponents? Did anyone come in as an informational witness? Seeing none, we're open for questions from the committee. Any questions from committee members? Senator Bolanger.
Question for the sponsor, please.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Watson-Reed, I apologize for missing the first part of testimony. In reviewing the bill and listening to the testimony, most of the testimony was about veterans' post-traumatic stress disorder, and the bill just addresses PTSD in general. And I'm under the understanding that there's a lot of other forms of PTSD, from car accidents or catastrophic injuries or, bad things that happen to good people. Was the intent of the bill to address just veterans' PTSD or the population in general, anybody that gets PTSD?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Belanger, you missed a spellbinding opening where I covered that very point, but I'll just make it again. It's not intended to be just for veterans, but the largest number of people that are afflicted with post-traumatic stress disorder are disproportionately represented by veterans. The process has not changed. If a person is diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and this were to be the law, the doctor could prescribe legally medical marijuana or medical cannabis, if you will. So it's intended to apply for the whole population, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Further questions? Yes, Senator Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also for the sponsor, I just note also that in the title of the bill it does refer to medical marijuana. So hopefully your proponents don't object to your bill because of the language it's in the title. My question, I guess, that comes up as I listen to the testimony is there any type of discretion or information that medical doctors can use to determine if medical use of marijuana would actually help calm the mental issues that we're hearing about, or is there any possibility that this could actually exacerbate those conditions because of the psychotic properties of the drug? I would just want to make sure that we're not making a situation worse.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, that's left to the physician, just like all the other. If you look at the bill, if you look just in the existing law, starting at line 15 on page 1, the doctor has the discretion under existing law to prescribe all of those items down through where the amendment is on page 2. So there's discretion given to a physician in those areas currently. The physician would exercise the same professional judgment and discretion to prescribe medical cannabis as well for medical, or let's say post-traumatic stress disorder. So to answer your question, if the doctor's judgment, professional judgment, is that prescribing medical marijuana would actually make the matter worse, it wouldn't prescribe it. And the recipient would still have to have a prescription under the current process that's in place. This only adds that malady, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up, please.
Follow up.
So do the doctors have information available or psychological related information? Because we've talked about medical marijuana in terms of pain and those types of things and the medicinal properties of it for pain. But this is a different, this is a mental condition. And do the doctors does the profession see this as a viable source to treat mental issues?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Fielder, you'd have to ask a physician. I mean, in order for you to get the best answer to that question, you'd have to talk to a physician about how much information is available, whether or not the science actually points toward this remedy actually doing any good. And I would remind you what I said in my opening. There are all kinds of non-traditional methods that do work. Mine's the best example. I know mine worked. And I know that there are literally dozens of people I've become acquainted with in the last 2 years who are law-abiding citizens in every respect, but they have post-traumatic stress disorder and are illegally using medical marijuana or medical cannabis right now. If this were to pass, if this became the law, the doctor would have to use his or her own best professional judgment about whether or not they have enough information in front of them to prescribe, through the process that's already in law, access to medical marijuana as a course of treatment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Any further questions from committee members? Seeing none, Senator Wanzen-Reed may close.
Mr. Chairman, it was 2 years ago today, coincidentally, that this same committee reported out a bill on post-traumatic stress disorder. I actually checked the record. So there is symmetry in life. After the bill passed out of committee, shortly after that bill passed out of committee, coincidentally, I guess, there were raids in Montana, and everybody thought that was the end of it. But for those of us that spoke up, and for those of us that spoke up against the bills that did pass last session, it didn't end. And the reason you don't have a lot more people here today is because of that. I was interviewed twice by DEA agents. I've never used medical marijuana, have no interest in it. I'm sure my telephone records were monitored, my bank accounts were monitored as well. I don't know what happened to all the other people and came and testified, but they didn't appear this time. There's something wrong. You wanted to have a discussion about this? There's something really wrong. And this issue of post-traumatic stress disorder is not going to go away. Those harsh, addictive drugs that are available on the market are still going to be there. In fact, last session, the pharmaceutical industry was sitting on the sidelines mocking how we were systematically eliminating any competition for them, for prescription medication and psychotropic drugs that frankly had terrible, terrible side effects, not just for veterans, but for anybody, anywhere. This bill is a very, very small change, and for those of you that think there needs to be scientific evidence, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I want you to look at the other currently authorized conditions that can be treated with medical cannabis and ask yourself, why those? Crohn's disease is on here. MS is on the list. How about Lou Gehrig's disease? How about other cancers? They're not listed. And there's plenty of scientific evidence, I think, in the balance that would suggest that post-traumatic stress disorder and all of those others could legitimately be added to this. Is there a risk with that, with prescriptions? Yes. But there's also a risk with prescription drugs on the market. Last session, we passed a bill that required a registry to keep track of people that were doctor shopping. So don't think for a moment, if this bill dies, that we won't have abuse of prescription medication that some people will choose to take. And in closing, Mr. Chairman, 2 points. If ever there was an opportunity to show the veterans that we really do care and to provide them with one other avenue for relief, it would be here. So if you want to, in any one small way, suggest that we can actually run the risk of being in conflict, and I will take the word of counsel here, with federal policies, it would be in this area. It would be a good policy for this state to show those veterans that through their physician, they could actually have access to medical cannabis. And for that reason, Mr. Chairman, I ask for a due pass on the bill.
Thank you, and this will close the hearing on Senate Bill 310. We will open the hearing now on Senate Bill 311 by Senator Wanzen-Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Dave Wanzen-Reed, Senate District 49 in Missoula, members of the committee. This isn't a companion bill, but they both happen to be drafted and delivered at the same time. It deals with the same issue of medical cannabis, but it doesn't amend the medical marijuana law, so it doesn't have to have one of those disclaimers about, I know that there's a conflict between this and federal policy and federal law. This proposes to amend another statute. And if you look at the proposed language in the bill, we would require the state, through this policy, would require the Board of Pharmacy to change the classification of marijuana in accordance with federal law if it were to change. If it were to change from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 2, 3, or 4. And it would have to do so promptly. The language, I admit, in the bill itself is a little inflammatory, but I was told by the folks that do the drafting that that clearly states the intent that if the legislature enacts this, and sometime in the future, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the DEA and the Congress decide to reclassify the Controlled Substances Act to move the classification, the schedule classification of marijuana to something other than a Class 1, that the State Board of Pharmacy would have to act promptly to mirror that. And so you're wondering, well, why would we want to do that? Well, as I told you in the other bill, right now there's a question about whether or not we're in conformity with federal policy and federal laws. If that law were to change at the national level and we had a state law, then we would have people possibly out of compliance with a state law that continue to have it's listed as a Schedule 1. So this bill simply says if that ever happens, we'll remove the potential of having a conflict between a national policy that's been changed and a state policy that might be out of compliance with that. And for those of you that think, well, maybe we shouldn't do that, just think about the other areas where we argue that we should not have a higher standard in states. For many of you that feel we ought to be able to tell ourselves what that standard would be, this simply says if there's ever reduced national standard, the state would follow along with it. Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. How many folks are here to speak in favor of this one? Is anyone here as an opponent to this one? Anybody here is informational? Okay, first proponent, please.
Thank you again for letting me speak. I'm just simply going to say that I am in support of SB 311. We need a workable bill so that these people who are truly sick and who are truly suffering can have safe access. Thank you very much. My name is Tammy Cecil, C-E-C-I-L.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Good morning again, Chair and members of the committee. Again, for the record, Nikki Zupanik with the ACLU of Montana. For the reasons shared by Senator Wanzenreed in his opening, we support Senate Bill 311 and urge a due pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent, please.
Yes, again, my name is Dr. Pat Pardis, spelled P-A-R-D-I-S, representing MTCIA, which is the Montana Cannabis Information Association, and we fully support SB 310, and we ask for your due pass. Thank you.
Further proponents?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Nathan Pierce, P-I-E-R-C-E. This bill just seems like a matter of good housekeeping, keeps us in line with federal policy. We'd certainly urge you to vote a due pass on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further proponents? Seeing none, we'll go to opponents. First opponent.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. Again, I'm Candace Payne, P-A-Y-N-E. I'm here speaking on behalf of Rimrock Foundation. As I stated earlier, Rimrock is Montana's oldest and largest drug and alcohol addiction treatment program. Rimrock is opposed to any legalization of marijuana and sees this bill as putting the cart before the horse. It is premature. There is no need to pass legislation taking control from this drug. As Senator Wanzenreed said, it may be 10 years or 20 years, and who knows what will happen during that time. Even if the federal government does take away its Schedule I controlled substance standard for this product, that does not mean it's a good idea. Legalizing the use of marijuana has proven to be a bad idea in Montana. Last session, Senator Essman put together a bill to bring this industry under control. This is not the time to be undoing this good work. On behalf of Rimrock Foundation, I ask you for a do not pass on Senate Bill 311. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there further opponents? Did anyone come in as an informational witness? Seeing none, questions from the committee? And seeing none, Senator Wanzenreed may close.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I'd like to close. This bill doesn't do anything along the lines that was justified by the lone opponent. It doesn't extend what we've already done in Montana. It simply says if the federal government changes the classification, the State Board of Pharmacy will do the same. The prescription and access to it will be the same in Montana. Effectively, if we don't do this, and let's say 20 days from now or 20 months from now, it was changed. The State Board of Pharmacy alone could hold a very distinct power to decide if, in fact, we would have a repeal of the medical marijuana law by simply saying we're not going to reclassify it and have state enforcement of a law that would be in contradiction to a national law. This doesn't do anything more than simply say we will mirror whatever happens at the national level. I think it's good policy. I don't think it's premature at all. In fact, for many of you, one of the things that we always say is, well, we don't want to be under the thumb of the federal government. This simply says if it changes its policy, the state policy will change with it. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'd ask for a due pass on the bill.
Thank you. This will close the hearing on Senate Bill 311. We have one more bill to hear.